Hello and welcome to the Big Picture podcast, brought to you by Ipsos. My name is Alyssa Rowan and today we'll be discussing an important topic, navigating the AI revolution and innovative advancements in cancer. This subject has many threads, from the opportunities and challenges underpinning use of artificial intelligence in oncology, to fully realising the benefits that evolving screening and treatment developments can offer. I'm delighted to be joined by David Bateson and Professor Fiona Gilbert. Thank you so much for being here today, and I'll start by asking you to introduce yourselves.
So I'm Fiona Gilbert. I'm an academic radiologist at the University of Cambridge. I do clinical work at Addenbrooke's, mainly breast cancer work. I also am the lead advisor in artificial intelligence for radiology for the Royal College of Radiologists.
Hi, I'm David Bateson and I'm a cancer patient. So I had a 4 or 5 year battle with stage 4 cancer. Thankfully, I'm in remission now. It's been 2 years. And since then, it's completely changed my life. I do loads of fundraising. I sit on the patient advisory group for Addenbrooke's and just try to really give back.
Oh, well, thank you both. It's really great to have you here, as I've said. We're going to start by talking about screening and diagnosis, which I know is a really important area at the moment, particularly the fact that there's always been this urgent need for timely cancer detection, but now we have a lot more emphasis on preventative screening measures, new technological developments, so AI-based imaging for diagnostics or screening. I guess I'm just wondering from both of your perspectives, what's the value behind these initiatives? What are you most excited about?
I think there's fantastic opportunity, and it's brilliant that the 10-year cancer plan has just been announced. It's had huge consultation, huge input. So from a research point of view, there's been huge steps forward. There's fantastic innovations ongoing. And I think the really important thing is that we're now looking at how we implement some of those things or how we support more research to see exactly what we should be doing to improve cancer survival in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, from a patient perspective, from my own journey, the treatment was amazing, but it was quite reactive. If you think about when I first found my lesion, it popped up on my scalp and they took it out quickly, which was fantastic, and didn't think it had spread. And then a year later, the cancer popped up on my lymph nodes. So I was at stage 3, loads of treatment on my neck, thought they'd got it. So second time in remission. And then unfortunately, a year later, it then popped up in my main organs. So although I'm lucky to be here and I benefited from immunotherapy, which is a fantastic treatment, it was quite very reactive. And it'd be lovely in the future if we can be more proactive and, sort of detect cancer earlier, so I didn't have to go through that journey.
Absolutely. And Fiona, you mentioned as well this idea that maybe screening can become more targeted and based on maybe risk stratification. I don't know if there's more you can say there.
Absolutely. If we take the breast screening programme, for example, in which I work, we treat women as if they're all the same risk, the exception being people who may have a gene, one of the BRCA genes, in which case they get quite high risk, intensive screening with MRI. And then people who have a very strong family history, they get more, which is fantastic. But the general population, everybody is treated exactly the same way. We screen every 3 years in the UK. We're the only country in the world with such a long gap between the breast x-rays. And we now know that we can put people into high risk, low risk, and medium risk. And we think that one of the things that we can do is actually put more resource and better tests into those people who are above the population risk, and those people who are at less risk, we shouldn't be wasting their time by calling them every 3 years. We could maybe move to 4 yearly screening or even 5 yearly screening. And there's good questionnaire tests. We can do blood tests where we can look at little pieces of genetic material called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. And we can add that information together and then better see who would benefit from more and more intensive testing and other people who we shouldn't be worrying so much.
That's amazing. I mean, some really amazing developments happening. And I know we know that earlier, more accurate screening and diagnosis directly improves outcomes, prevents deaths. But we also know that these developments aren't universal across the UK, certainly not across the world. But if we think about the UK, not universal. And I guess from your perspective, Fiona, why do you think that is, and where's the kind of friction?
The screening programmes across the UK, the public health people who commission the work are absolutely adamant that it must be completely equal. There should be no postcode lottery. Everything should be offered to everybody, and that's terribly important. So when we're looking at the innovations, we need to look and see what have we got capacity for across the country. And you mentioned AI at the very beginning. So one of the really exciting changes with AI is that a breast X-ray is basically a series of numbers. It's a digital picture. And so it really lends itself to artificial intelligence. And we've got very good artificial intelligence now which can help us look at the mammogram and spot a cancer. The other amazing, I think, innovation, which looks really encouraging, is that as well as trying to risk stratify people with questionnaires and their genetic material, is that we can take a breast X-ray and there's an AI tool which will tell us who is going to develop a cancer before their next test. So we can then take those women, so it's maybe 10% or less of those people, and give them a different test. We don't have the capacity across the country to offer everybody the best test, which would be MRI or contrast mammography. But what we can do, we think we can now select people across the country and say, yes, we'll find far more cancers if we do this selectively. And this is what we mean by risk stratification. And so I think things are really very exciting at the moment in terms of what we should be doing.
As a patient, to hear some of that stuff is pretty amazing. And going back to my story in terms of, great treatment, I'm lucky to be here, but quite reactive. Fiona talked about a lot of proactive steps, which is amazing. And if we can get to that position, and across the country, not just in certain areas, it'd be fantastic. How do you share information? How do you make sure that we have a level playing field across the country? And as a patient, sometimes you don't see that because it's a fast moving world as well. To be fair, so you're not going to see it sometimes. But it'd be nice to have that comfort that it's being shared. Best practice is being pushed out.
Yeah, one of the really important things in the cancer plan is this mention of the cancer alliances. And these are the partnerships which are going to try and ensure that things like a new clinical trial, what we want to do when people have got a new drug, for instance, is you test it on a relatively small group of people, but they're quite selective. And what we want to do that is as quickly as possible. And the way to do it is by offering the trial across the country. And it's things like these partnerships which allow clinical trials to be done much more quickly and give everybody, regardless of geographic location, the opportunity to participate in the trial. I mean, we've got fantastic big cancer centres of excellence, and that's great. But also we need to allow the patients across the country to participate in studies, because the faster we can recruit into these studies, it makes such a massive difference, and we can really accelerate progress.
How do you think you can improve that kind of acceleration of getting patients into trials? What do you come up against at the moment with that, and how could that maybe be changed in the future?
So there's good cancer trials networks, and that's fantastic. And so it means the oncologists all meet together, and there's UK meetings, there's European meetings, so that they hear what's going on across Europe, often UK's leading trials and things. But the important thing is that there's good communications. And of course, in this electronic age, that's really facilitated. We can have Zoom meetings, etc. And so people can come together and ensure that patients can be recruited. So an Aberdeen patient can be recruited into a London study. A Manchester patient could be recruited into a Cambridge study. Yeah. And it's about ensuring that the support networks for facilitating research are in place. One of the barriers has been, and you mentioned, what are the barriers here? Why are we kind of a bit slow here? Is that we need to have great support from our research and development offices, which are based in each of the hospitals. And so we need to really support them to fast track the paperwork through the hospitals so that we can open trials more quickly. Because it really, it's such a lot of work opening it. It's a lot of work getting the money in the first place. And then it's a huge effort to get trials opened across multiple sites. So we need to really make that easier. And the process, the wonderful thing is at the moment is that if you have to get ethical approval before you can do a study, and we have a centralized ethics committees. It's a distributed network. It works really effectively. And it means that if I get approval from actually any of the regional ethics committees, it means that the approval is across the country. It's fantastic. What we want to try and do now with artificial intelligence is get the same model working for approval for artificial intelligence studies, because that means we can then get more rapid adoption into the different hospitals and we can do the studies. But if I can't get the AI tool into a hospital, I can't even think about starting a study there. And the poor R&D department, it's too hard for them because there's so many steps and good steps, information governance and clinical safety around artificial intelligence. It's new technology, and so people aren't quite sure how to deal with it. But it's one of the things we really need to streamline so we can then have more rapid recruitment geographically across the country.
David, what's your thoughts on that in the sense of, I think we talk a lot about AI just out there, as you just said, and also public mistrust of it to a certain degree as well, or fears as well as the benefits. And from a patient point of view, how do you think those can be overcome so that when we finally get to the point where they're able to be embedded in the systems, there's no resistance from the patient side? It's kind of smooth sailing.
I think it all comes down to communication, doesn't it? Is telling the patient how you're going to use AI and how it's going to be embedded into that care plan for the relevant patient. And because there is a little bit of mistrust with it. I mean, it is getting better and it'll get better and better and better. And why not use it? It's a great aid for all of us in our lives, but it can't replace humans. It needs to work alongside humans. So we just need to know from a patient perspective how it's being used early on.
And I know in your role as well, as part of the patient advocacy group, you've made sure that the patient voice is kind of embedded right from the start. How does that work where you are, and how could that be replicated elsewhere?
So probably a great time to talk about the Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital, which is obviously based at Cambridge. I mean, it's chaired by Fiona and Neil, and the stuff that they do is unbelievable. And the project is so open to hearing about what patients would like in the new hospital.
Yeah, I mean, the Cancer Hospital is a great initiative because it's going to really help us. It's going to really facilitate the research. And so it's fantastic that the hospital has been designed in such a way that we can bring in new technology. And there's this huge encouragement from Cancer Research UK, who are also a partner in the hospital and helping fundraising, to really facilitate the research. And so it's absolutely a cancer research hospital, but completely focused on patient care and improving the delivery of the care and improving survival.
Obviously lots of positive developments, but maybe just thinking about the other side of the coin, the possible watch outs. You mentioned to me on a different occasion, Fiona, this idea of not over treating patients and needing to check which screening approaches work the best. I wondered if you could just talk us through that.
Oh, it's super important to look at the benefits and the costs of screening generally, but also if you're introducing a new technology into a screening program, or a new way of selecting people. We discussed that a bit earlier. So there's the actual costs in terms of equipment and staff if you're doing something extra, but there's a huge cost to a patient if you do a test and find they've got a cancer, but in fact that cancer would never have been found if that patient hadn't had that extra test or the test in the first place. And it's called overdiagnosis. And then when you're diagnosed with something, very few people accept the watch and wait policy, because unless they're kind of very reassured and say, okay, we'll follow you up every year, every 6 months. And so you end up then treating this person that would never have come to harm from their cancer. So that's the overtreatment. So a lot of the work we do is try and work out which are the cancers that are overdiagnoses, and can we minimize the treatment that we give to people who have very low risk disease. So this is this dilemma, overdiagnosis and overtreatment. When we do, I get overexcited with new technology. I really, I love AI, I love, new imaging methods and things. I just think it's fantastic. I think, oh, gosh, we can do so much. We can really improve patient outcomes. But I have to remember that sometimes we might do harm.
And that's a thin line, isn't it? As a patient, trust me, when you've got cancer, you want it all. You want action. And it's a very, very thin line between, watch and wait and active care. And if we can solve that, because we haven't got a bottomless pit of money, this country. So, there's got to be a balance, but it's a very, very thin line.
It is. I was going to ask you, David, for your opinion, because I think there's been quite a jump onto these developments as far as people in the public know about them, a keenness to go and get screened if you can and everything like that. And we're all humans and all possible patients here, essentially. I think it's quite a natural desire. So it's that balancing act and to your point, Fiona, communication, and how can that be optimized so that people really do understand and react in the right way and seek the right care when they should, but also not when it's not needed.
Just listening to Fiona, I'm no oncologist, I'm just a patient, but you just know it's a fast moving world. And I'm just going back to my experiences when I was told I had stage 4 melanoma. I was looking at Google, and you don't want to do that. Dr. Google is not your friend, but I had a thirst to find out what the hell was going on. And my consultant said, stick on the sensible sites, so Macmillan or Cancer Research. Look at those sites for your data. And the data was telling me 5% chance of survival beyond 5 years. And the consultant who dealt with my immunotherapy, she said, there's a new drug on the market called immunotherapy, and it's pushing those chances from 5% to 40%. And so I was getting one thing from the computer saying 5%, and another thing from my consultant, and the consultant's in the know because she's involved with trials and stuff. So but then there wasn't loads of evidence, so it'd be unfair to have a pop at Cancer Research UK. But it's how do you get better information to patients early on in the process? That's crucial, and it's tough because it's a fast-moving world.
We're going to move on to think now about the other side, the other coin to the story, which is obviously all around cancer treatment, which, David, you've just started speaking about a little bit. But I guess the abilities that all of these developments that we've spoken about today give us in the sense of earlier diagnosis means more chance to tailor treatments, to use new innovative treatments, to give patients the best possible chance of outcomes. So maybe just talk a little bit more about the opportunities for those, but then also any challenges you can see.
Sure. Just reflecting on my treatment, my prognosis wasn't great. Historically, if you had melanoma at stage 4, you were done. Radiotherapy, chemotherapy didn't work well with melanoma, and that's a fact. And immunotherapy, which is a new type of cancer drug in relative terms, I was lucky. It was very kind. It's a kinder drug than I guess chemo and radiotherapy would be. But that's generally speaking, because not everyone gets that outcome. But I got a little bit lucky. And I was on it for 2.5 years. And to think that my cancer was very progressive in the early days. In a 3-month period, it went from a couple of lymph nodes to my liver, lungs and spine. And it was moving fast, and melanoma is that type of cancer. But immunotherapy halted it, so it turned it from a progressive disease to a stable disease. And I was living with cancer for 2.5 years, and I got into a great mindset with that. And I lived around my scans. I lived 3 months at a time, and I actually have happy memories of that period. I started doing my fundraising to give back, because someone had done it for me previously to get the drug on the shelf. And amazingly, after 2.5 years, in January 24, I was told that they couldn't trace it. And you just think, just the concept of, where it was, in terms of melanoma and chemo to where it is now. And my story is not unusual.
It sounds like you had a really great relationship with your oncologist. Yeah. That's actually something we're really interested in too, in terms of, you said communication is key earlier when we were talking about how do you bring patients along the journey with you. How did you develop that relationship, and kind of what would be your advice almost, I guess, for other patients and oncologists working together?
Yeah, it was quite tricky because it was the height of COVID, and we had our first few meetings on Zoom, which is fine, but you can't beat a bit of personal touch. But I guess, when you have quite a serious illness, you get to know people pretty well, and you see them a lot. We've just struck up a nice friendship. She was open to different things. I hate the thought of waiting for scan results. So that's when the scan anxiety comes back. And now it's every 6 months, my scans. It was every 3, but I flipped to 6 monthly. And I've done a deal and said, I don't want a meeting. So whenever those results come in, just pop me a text. And she does that because I don't want to build myself up to that one-to-one meeting, waiting in that waiting room for the results. And it's having that tailored care. And that means a lot to me. And she's adjusted. She takes on board what I might want, and she adjusts it accordingly. And I just, she saved my life. That's how I feel.
Amazing. What are your thoughts, Fiona, on that, or on treatment in general?
So one of the things in radiology that's a big challenge for us is reporting scans in a timely fashion. First of all, making sure that these diagnostic tests are available, that they're available in the right areas for people, but also that we report them in a timely manner. Because the reality is, because imaging is so amazing now, then generally doctors are much more reliant on imaging, and most oncologists will not make a decision about a patient until they've got the reported imaging results. And so what we need to do, as well as absolutely making sure there's sufficient oncologists, we do need more oncologists as well, because it's this human interaction is so important. We need more radiologists to have much more timely delivery of these results, because it's just so unacceptable. We think AI will help us, but as you quite rightly said, there needs to be a human in the loop. But we think, for example, that some of the AI tools, we could maybe take even like 30% of the scans, and the AI is absolutely certain there's no cancer there. And there's such a low probability of being a cancer there that we won't miss any cancers. And then you think, is that not kind of wasting my expertise? Should I not be doing the difficult stuff? Should I not be communicating with our patients? Should I not be doing the biopsies? Should I not be going to the MDT and really, having more patients being discussed there in a more timely way? So I think there is a place for what we call autonomous AI, but only done in the absolutely most rigorously tested, safest fashion. And I think there's certain instances, like the mammogram. The mammogram is yes, no. It's cancer, no cancer. And so it's probably one of the areas that, not at the moment, but in the future, that we could say we could get rid of maybe 30% of the workload. But I think there is a place for autonomous reporting, only having AI report the absolutely normal examinations. And it'll only be a small percentage of those. But it will help us deliver things more efficiently.
Especially after the government announced the plans yesterday and the targets for the next 10 years.
We really need to work on delivering things and improving cancer survival in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. That piece around radiology and the AI imaging was huge this year at ESMO, the European conference around oncology. And there's a lot of talk as well around where sometimes it can see beyond the human eye, or sometimes it can predict how the tumour will develop in future. So just wondering what your views are on that piece.
Yeah, so we've been doing some research on, we've taken prediction. So we've taken 5 different companies where we've got a big data set of screening mammograms in Cambridge, from Norwich as well. And what we've done is we know the outcome of patients over the next 5 years. We know which were the cancers picked up by the mammogram read by the radiologist. We know which of the cancers that evolved in the 3 years between the screening, and then we've got the next set of mammograms. So we know the outcomes for patients over a 5-year period. And we've tested these algorithms, and some of them are just, they're different performance levels. Most of them are pretty good, actually. But so they look really, really promising. And I think this is one of the things that we should be thinking about when we stratify patients. So we want to know what the patient's risk is. We want probably add the genetics information to that. And then we want to take the imaging information and say, yes, who's going to develop a cancer, or who does the AI think that the radiologist and the detection AI has overlooked? Actually, they need a specialist test. They need this contrast examination so we can pick up their cancers early. So I think there's huge scope for prediction.
And that goes into predicting response to treatment as well, right?
Absolutely. So that's another area where we take baseline MRI scans or baseline CT scans and then use that information to see who's going to do well from a certain drug regime and who's going to do less well. Because that's really important information. If you can use the scans to help work out, actually, that patient's not going to do well from that particular drug, why waste 6 months of their life? That's awful. Yeah. Time is precious.
It's so true, isn't it? If you think about, the cancer in my body and how it spread, it was in the lesion on my scalp, and they checked the lymph node almost straight away and did a biopsy, and it was clear, and I thought I was okay. But obviously it was in transit, and the scans, wouldn't have picked it up because it's microscopic. It wouldn't have picked it up. And how does that work?
Yeah. So for example, one of the tests, we're very excited. I was going to say super excited, overexcited, super excited in Cambridge because we're getting a total body PET scanner. Now, the wonderful thing about these there aren't very many in the UK at the moment. The wonderful thing about these total body PET scanners is that we can reduce the radiation dose. So we inject a radioactive tracer into the body, which will then go to the cancer cells, it'll go to the melanoma cells. And by having this basically very long tube, this whole body PET scanner, we can reduce the dose of radiation the patient will get down to 10%. So it's a tenth of the dose that we can give you. So previously, when we were treating melanoma patients with these new novel drugs, we would want to be doing the PET scans every 3 months to see if it's working. Particularly with new drug trial, new drugs and things, we really want to monitor them very closely. But now with this total body PET machine, we think we'll be able to monitor people more frequently because we can justify giving you another big radiation dose. Because having cured them, we don't want to be inducing cancers by giving them lots of radiation from the scans. So that, again, another piece of new technology to monitor how well somebody's doing and to help the oncologist test new drugs, because the drug pipeline is so important.
Yeah.
And that's one of the partnerships we've got in the new cancer hospital, the Cancer Research Hospital in Cambridge, is we've got AZ on site, AstraZeneca, and they've taken I think the top floor of the hospital for research. And that's fantastic because we need partnerships with pharma, big pharma, but also little pharma as well. The spin-outs and things, we need to help them develop their trials and new drugs that are coming online.
That's interesting you say that. I was going to ask you what you think the role of pharmaceutical companies can be in this. And I guess, David, from your point of view, I don't know how much you ever thought about the pharmaceutical company that sat behind the treatment that you received, or as on the patient advisory group at the moment, how that engagement works.
I mean, I would have loved to have known the history of immunotherapy. I think working closely together in terms of research and care, and if a patient can see how that drug was developed or what the journey was and the history of that drug, it's quite nice to know that.
The drug industry is absolutely critical partnership, and the NCRI, the National Cancer Research Institute, work very closely with big pharma and also the smaller drug companies to help understand their drug development pipeline, and also try and facilitate trials being undertaken in the UK. Because one of the things where we are envied by, certainly my European colleagues, is that we have this single national health system. And, we are getting much better now at sharing data across hospitals. We're getting, the digital strategy has been so important in terms of helping pharma understand where are the patients with these diseases that we need to test this new drug on, and that information gathering, information sharing is critical, because they can then say, actually, there seems to be a spike of this type of cancer in this area, this is where we need to be doing this clinical trial, or actually, this is quite a rare disease, we only want to test it on this small, tiny group of people, how do we access them? And actually, we can begin to use things like AI with the electronic health record to find those patients, which is fantastic. So anything that we can do to help pharma is great, because it accelerates the clinical trials and it gets the drugs. Well, we know whether the drug is going to work or not, and we get it into clinical practice much more quickly.
And I think as a patient, you want access to everything. You really do. You want always, give me the list of trials, leave nothing off the table, help me. And that's crucial.
But we have to make it easier for patients. It's too much to expect the patient to have to do that legwork.
Yeah, of course.
We need to make it much more accessible.
You also mentioned postcode lottery earlier, and it not no one wanting that to be the case.
Yeah.
So I think we probably can safely say that not every hospital, not every area is created equally when it comes to cancer care.
Yeah.
How can we overcome those inequities?
Absolutely. So, for example, the total body PET scanner is funded by the Medical Research Council, so through government funding. So we're just so excited about having this, which is great. But what the condition of getting it is that we need to make sure that patients from around the country can access it. It's not just for Adam Rook's patients, it's for the whole of East Anglia and the wider hinterland. And so when they were placing the scanners, there's one in London, so you could argue that, why is there one in Cambridge? But we've got great research teams in Cambridge, which is, I think, why we got one. But there's also one in Edinburgh. So it's to try and ensure that patients can access the scanners and the clinicians can do clinical trials with the total body PET scanner at these different centres. And obviously there needs to be more. So for example, the proton beam therapy scanner, which was installed in Manchester, there's also one in London, and it's to try and make sure they're geographically distributed across the country, but the conditions being you have to take patients from all areas. But when you've got high-tech equipment, we need to really make that easy.
I guess fundraising is quite important. I mean, this is why I do what I do, because I feel lucky to be here. So and Adam Brooks has got a fantastic charity aligned to it, Adam Brooks Charitable Trust, and they've put millions in the pot for the new Cambridge Cancer Research Hospital, and they'll continue to do that, amongst other things. And I think without funding, because let's be clear, money talks. Without funding across the country, then you might get that disparity in terms of services. And I think it's important that as a patient, to do some fundraising and to help others.
I couldn't agree more. So, for example, Cancer Research UK gave me a big programme grant, and that programme grant meant I could do, amongst other things, the AI work. So I could do testing of the AI tools to see, did they actually work? Did it work on UK patients? And because we'd done that, groundwork, I could then bid for the big Edith trial, which was, an £11 million grant. So Cancer Research really facilitated that background work, which meant that the government said, yes, actually, we've proven, using retrospective data that yes, the AI tools work. Yes, they're ready for testing. We can safely test them in the UK. And so the government then was much more likely to fund stuff. And it's funding things like this is so important.
Charities are there for a reason, to support hospitals like Adam Brooks.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you both for everything so far. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. And I want to just finish by giving you the chance to give me your closing thoughts. What's one final message you'd love people to take away today? Where do you think we should leave the discussion?
I mean, for me, as a patient, it's all about hope. And it's about the system getting better at detecting cancer rather than reacting to it.
From my perspective, I think AI has a huge contribution to make to our healthcare system in terms of helping radiologists see more cancers, deliver care more efficiently. There's all kinds of advancements in AI ongoing. In terms of innovative technologies, we really need to ensure the technologies are effective and actually improve patient care. So if people are offered trials, we really want them to participate in trials. If people are offered screening, we really want them to come for screening. It's so important. And then if they're offered additional opportunities to answer questionnaires or be part of discussion groups about AI, we need to know how people feel about it, because we want to try and embrace it. But we need the public to really help us do that. I think the National Cancer Plan is really exciting. It's ambitious. It's trying to coordinate all the existing activities, and this ambition to improve survival so that we have at least 75% of patients surviving is fantastic. We need to really try and use what we've got more efficiently.
I mean that's a fantastic target, isn't it? 75% living well or cancer-free, in 2035. A lot of work to get there. Some of the conversation we've had today about technology, about AI, will help us get there, but it's going to need a lot of effort, and I just really hope that those targets can be met. I know from my journey, you only get one chance this life. This isn't a rehearsal, and to get a second chance of living is just so special. And I just really hope that we can all give it a big push, whether you're fundraising, whether you're a clinician, to really make this work and hit those targets.
So David and Fiona, this has been an incredibly insightful discussion. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you everyone for listening. We really hope this episode has inspired you to reflect, spark some important conversations, and hopefully some thoughts for the future. Thank you.